Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting. So for welcome and introductions, this is a formal meeting of Hackney Council and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. The right of the press and public to record and film the meeting will continue to apply, and media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. It should be noted that whilst members of the Commission are present here in the Town Hall, officers will be connecting via a live link. Can I remind members present and officers connecting virtually that this meeting continues to be held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. In terms of operability, can you note the following? Unless you are speaking, please keep your microphone muted. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to get the attention of the chair.
I think we've lost the sound from the council chamber.
Can you hear now?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes, okay, great. Before we start meeting, I would like to inform the Commission that Justine MacDonald has taken a new role outside of Hackney and is unable to continue in her position as the statutory Roman Catholic representative on the Commission. I would like to formally thank Justine for her support for the work of the Commission over the past 2 years and wish her well in her new position. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Diane Benjamin to the meeting. Diane is the newly appointed Director of Children's Social Care, so on behalf of the Commission, welcome to Hackney and we look forward to working with you. Thank you for your patience. We're going to start the meeting. So, item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
I've got apologies from Councillor Lynch, Councillor Garcia, Councillor Peters and Richard Brown.
Thank you. Now moving on to item 2, urgent items, order of business. There are no urgent items and the agenda is as published. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have declarations of interest? Councillor Gordon?
I've got a declaration in relation to item 6, which is the action plan in response to the Ofsted inspection. I've been a member of the members' oversight group, so I will not take part in that item.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Jo?
I'm a governor at Scrutiny School in Hackney. I'm also a parent of a child with additional needs.
Are there any other declarations of interest?
James, if you have no on screen.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Peters?
So I'm the governor of the Garden School in Hackney.
And Shabnam?
Apologies from Councillor Peters. Or is it because he's attending remotely he can't be deemed to be present?
Shabnam?
I'm parent governor at Benthorpe Primary School and also a parent of a child with additional needs.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations of interest? If not, oh, sorry. Hidden.
Yes, I'm a parent of a child with additional needs.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to item 4, which is our first substantive item for this evening's meeting, commissioning of independent SEND services. At its meeting on May the 11th, 2021, the Commission received a report on SEND performance and financial recovery plan. In response to local concerns about independent SEND provision, it was agreed that a further follow-up report would be provided to allow the Commission to explore the nature of independent SEND provision and how such services are commissioned, the type of contracts issued to independent provision and how these are monitored and reviewed, the cost of independent SEND provision. For this item, we have Wendy Edwards, the SEND contract consultant, Joe Wilson, the head of SEND, Fran Cox, the head of high needs and school places, and Annie Gammon, the director of education. We have 45 minutes for this item, so can I ask officers to summarise the report for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we have questions for the remaining time. Handing over to officers now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Conway. And I'm just going to ask Councillor Woodley if she wants to say a couple of words as introduction.
Just to say that I'm really pleased we can bring you such a comprehensive report. This work has been undertaken over a couple of months with Wendy Edwards leading on it, and we know that there's been a lot of concern in that period about the number of children and young people we've got in independent settings, particularly those that are out of borough and the issues that that brings. So I will hand over because there's a number of people that you'll want to hear from, but I'm really pleased we're able to bring you this report.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley, and I'm going to start off with a bit of context before handing over to my colleagues. We're really ambitious, as it says in the beginning of the report, to get this right for every child in Hackney and for Hackney Council as a whole, because I think there is a twin approach of us making sure that each child has the right place for them, and there isn't just one right place for any child. There are always some options that we have to decide, and then having a system that is effective, that provides really good local choice effectively and good quality at a reasonable price. And I think costs we do have some finances in here. I do want to say that as we introduced my colleagues and Councillor Conway gave their titles, I just want to say that Jo Wilson is the longest serving of the three, having started with Hackney Council 6 months ago. Fran Cox started 3 months ago, and Wendy Edwards, who is our expert on SEND contracts, is doing a short-term piece of work for us and has been with us for 3 months. So you can see that my colleagues have not been here long, but have already made a huge difference in tackling this issue. And I'm really pleased that they are seeing this through for the benefit of residents and for the council and the children. I think it's probably important to emphasise the context, that you will see that numbers have almost doubled in 5 years, that in 2016-17 we had 272 pupils at independent or non-maintained schools at a cost of 8 million, and then in this last year we've had 474, so 202 more at a cost of 13.8 million. So this increase in the number of children with EHCPs, and then as a subset of those children placed in independent settings, is really significant. And it is right that we are looking closely at systems which may have been more appropriate for a lesser number of children. Now, with more significant costs, more significant numbers, absolutely need to be the best they possibly can be. I think it's also important to put in context that in Hackney we have about 25% of our young people are in the Orthodox Jewish community, and where there are equivalent proportion of children with special educational needs needing specialist settings. But those families, almost without exception, would want their child to go to an Orthodox Jewish school, so that does both increase the number of schools we use and means that we have a particular choices to make for those pupils. I think the other bit of context that's important to bear in mind is that, and that we've talked about at the last scrutiny, was that we are undertaking the development of a school organisation strategy, developing more local special schools, special places for children with special educational needs in local authority maintained settings. And that has some synergy with the reduction of places needed in mainstream schools. But I think Fran will probably say a little more about that. So Fran, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Annie. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for asking us to present this evening around this one aspect of our wider transformation programme. And I just want to perhaps touch on the wider context for a moment before handing over to Wendy, who will fill you in with a lot more detail around the SEND commissioning of independent schools. I think, as we mentioned last time we were with you, we are undertaking a wider transformation programme in relation to SEND in Hackney, but that's not perhaps unusual when we look around both at neighbouring London authorities, but also nationally. And I think that's important to stress again the context that we're working with in relation to the significant increase in children and young people identified with needs, and the financial pressure that places upon local authorities to deliver what they have to under the statutory requirements. And I think that's really important that we keep that in mind, that this is something that we as leaders within the SEND department are working with our partners in other local authorities to try and glean common understanding and lobby government as needed to try and raise the profile of this increasing pressure that we are under. But as Annie's noted, this is this is one aspect of the wider transformation programme, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle in many ways, and everything is interconnected. And what we're going to be speaking to you about tonight is connected in many ways with the assessment and planning processes that we're improving, and we have seen some improvements on, as well as the local education estate strategy, where we're seeking to increase SEND provision, and that's particularly relevant. And as Wendy will take us through more detail, our ambitions to deliver more local provision for children and young people will in turn impact significantly over the coming years on the financial figures and the numbers of children that we have in our independent and non-maintained school settings. So at that point, I will hand over to Wendy, who's going to give us a short overview of the paper that we've presented to you tonight before handing over to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran and Annie, and thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Just briefly to say, we have undertaken extensive work, including a benchmarking exercise with other local authorities, looking at the pressures in demand and the pressures in cost around placements within independent and non-maintained sector. And the issues we have raised in this paper, they are similar to a national picture, and they're similar to other local authorities who are also battling with this issue. In terms of the paper we're presenting today, we are on an improvement journey, and we are looking at transforming the way we deliver services within SEND system. And that includes jointly working with our partners in health and social care. And that also includes looking at our demand management and looking particularly at quality of provision, the outcomes that are delivered, and value for money. In terms of the children placed in independent and non-maintained placements, one of the things we have done is to introduce more rigor around contract monitoring, and we've introduced and issued the National Schools and Colleges Contract. And to date, we've had at least 42% providers who have positively responded, and we have also undertaken 2 market engagement events with all the schools and colleges that fall under independent and non-maintained special schools, and providers were confident and really happy that this will allow shared risk, shared intelligence, and a joint working in partnership arrangement that allows us to predict our future needs and to work with the market in terms of how we meet that. In addition to that, we have been working around really looking at the numbers of children that are currently placed within independent and non-maintained sector. I can reassure you that every child who's placed within this provision, there is an individual decision that has been made through the EHCP process and through the annual review process for them to be appropriately and suitably placed in such a provision. So they're all placed in these provisions for a reason. In addition to that, what we have also done, we have identified that there has been a lack of local provision in Hackney for specialist needs. At present, 56% of our cohorts, they are placed out of Hackney borders where they attend independent, non-maintained special schools, and 44% of these cohorts are educated within these provisions locally in Hackney. In terms of doing what we call a market provision map, we have looked at all the providers we use, and one of the things we've asked providers to do is to undertake accreditation checks. That includes giving us all the information as part of a pre-qualification selection questionnaire around robust systems they have in place in terms of delivery of this provision. And what we have started to do is roll out a new accreditation form, which is part of the papers you've received, that providers will complete, and throughout the summer period and beginning of school next academic year, we will be collating this information and forming it to form a view as part of our performance monitoring mechanism for the contract management processes. In addition to that, Hackney is a member of a group of local authorities called CRAG, the Children Cross-Regional Arrangements Group. And this group of local authorities, they look at quality monitoring and outcomes monitoring, as well as value for money when it comes to fee uplift negotiations with such schools. And we have expanded our membership from social care for children's residential placements to cover independent and non-maintained special schools. So we are confident that in terms of the future trajectory, we've got more rigor and control around the providers we are using. We understand the needs of the children that we are placing within these provisions, and it's primarily those children with autistic spectrum disorders, as well as social, emotional, and mental health issues. So we are confident that we are putting in place the right processes to give us assurance that we are using the right provisions at the right cost and for the right children to be placed within these provisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Wendy, Fran and Annie for that. And I'd just like to reiterate what Annie said at the beginning about just thanking officers for putting together this report at such short notice, especially given how new members of the team are. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for the glossary, which we don't tend to include in reports, which is very useful for those of us here at the meeting today and those observing at home. So thank you very much for that. Do we have questions from the Commission? Should we start with, I think, Jo, you have a question that you'd like to ask.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this report. My question was really regarding the strategic ambitions of this commissioning process and the review of the commissioning process that is happening at the moment. And you did touch earlier on saying that it needs to be contextualised and viewed as a piece with the whole school organisation strategy. And I'm aware that that is an ongoing strategic process, but I wonder if you could speak with a little bit more detail about what those strategic aims look like in terms of school places. Are those aims for more in-borough provision achievable within a short time frame? And if you could just put a little bit of a time frame and some more detail onto what sort of places you're looking to provide in the borough, how you would see that transition from the out-of-borough provision to bringing it more in-house and over what time frame. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we might attempt to take two questions at a time. We'll see how we get on with that. I have a question from Councillor Hanson, please.
Forgive me if this was in the paper and I didn't spot it, but is there anywhere sort of set out what capacity is currently vacant in the Hackney SEND estate? Because certainly I know that at one time Ickborough School had quite a lot of vacancies, but I understand that may not be the case anymore.
Thank you very much. I think Fran and Jo are probably best placed to answer those.
Certainly, Annie, thank you. I'll take the first one, Jo, and then hand over to you for the second. So our wider school place planning commissioning strategy sits within the Education Estate Strategy. And the Education Estate Strategy has 4 key priorities. Firstly, to deliver additional SEN provision in borough. I'll come back to that one in a little bit more detail because I think that's the one that you'll be more interested in this evening. Priority 2 is to consider how we deal with our primary schools that have a significantly low falling roll, and see how we address that with our primary schools. Thirdly, working with our secondary schools over the next 2 to 5 years to work with them around the issue of falling rolls, which will naturally progress into the secondary sector. And lastly, to consider how our education estate can be a sustainable and well-used, efficient estate over the next 10 years. So looking at priority 1 in more specifics, we are looking to increase our SEND provision in a number of ways. So firstly, we are considering how we can expand our existing special schools onto satellite sites. Secondly, we're thinking around how we can deliver more provision through additional resource provisions attached to mainstream schools, looking particularly around the autistic spectrum disorder need, moderate learning difficulties, and speech, language and communication needs. And we're also looking at how we can work with our mainstream schools to better embed a graduated response to enable them to work with the children and young people that are placed with them to deliver a more inclusive education, and make sure our support services are well wrapped around those schools to be able to do that. So timescales for that are we're seeking to, the strategy is still in draft currently, and we're working with the stakeholder group to deliver that. We would seek to start to finalise those strategic approaches in the autumn, with a view to implementation and statutory consultations that might be needed through the late autumn into the early spring. So we're certainly pressing on with earnest within that strategy to make sure that everything we're talking about this evening and the need to place children in out of borough provision or in independent schools is addressed as soon as we can. Building new provision is not a quick thing. Neither is creating additional places in schools because of the statutory timescales. But we would want those provisions, those places to be available from September 23. Which is the soonest we can bring them to fruition with the current statutory timescales that we have. So hopefully that's a little bit more detail, Joe, around the first point. But then, Joe Wilson, in relation to any vacancies that we currently have, I'll hand that one over to you.
Thank you, Fran. Our 3 maintained special schools in Hackney, so the Garden Special School, Stormont House and Ickborough, are all at capacity at the moment. So we don't have any vacancies. Some children will probably move in September, which is the natural course of things as families sometimes move out of the area, but all those places will be taken up. We currently have a waiting list for special placements.
Thank you very much. Joe, did you have a follow-up question? Or are we happy with, you happy? Okay, did you have a follow-up question?
No.
I just wondered if I could come in with a follow-up question quite specifically on the education estate strategy, Fran, and what you'd mentioned about the, in particular, the extra SEND provision in the borough. And I'm also coming back to a point that was made by Annie earlier about the needs of the children from the Orthodox Jewish community with EHC plans. And I'm just wondering how this strategy responds quite specifically to their needs, because from what I understand, there are 3 options open to parents of children with special educational needs in the borough, and that's mainstream settings, which is where most children with special educational needs with an EHC plan attend, and then we have maintained settings, and then we have the private settings. But it seems as though the options are very different for children from the Orthodox Jewish community, as was mentioned by Annie earlier, that the majority, if not the majority of the children from the Orthodox Jewish community with EHC plans attend private settings. I'm just unclear as to how the strategy that's been mentioned will go anyway to address the over-reliance on independent settings by the Orthodox Jewish community. So I just wondered if you'd be able to come in on that at all.
Certainly, and thank you for drawing attention to it. It's absolutely at the heart of the education estate strategy to provide equity across the borough for all of our communities, and there certainly isn't the equity that we would like there to be yet within the Orthodox Jewish community in terms of equal access to good and better provision. We do have one very good example in the borough in Side by Side Special School in terms of good provision for the Orthodox Jewish community in terms of a special school. So we're working closely with them to see how we might work to certainly formalise our commissioning relationship with them and how we can work with them to develop their provision further. We've also formed an alliance with Interlink and the communities that they represent to make sure that we outline a clear strategy for the Orthodox Jewish community within the Education Estate strategy. And there's particular focus on Side by Side within that, but also around post-13 provision for boys with SEND, because currently they're the cohort that primarily attend the independent schools, where we have very, very little oversight and very little ability to inform practice there. So I think there's a real opportunity here to really make some changes in the provision that's offered within the community and form good relationships, which we hope will stand us on good stead to be able to work even closely with them in the coming months and years going forward. But you're absolutely right to point that out, and we would seek to try and redress that inequality through this strategy where we can.
Fran, do we anticipate that this will reduce the reliance on independent settings for the Orthodox Jewish community?
That would certainly be our intention. That would certainly be our intention. I think it's useful. It's important to note that parental preference plays an important element in any decision around where a child or young person goes in relation to SEND, and we can only affect parental preference, of course, by giving them an appropriate choice and encouraging them to seek outstanding and good provision. So but our hope and our intention is that this would certainly reduce the numbers that currently attend those provisions.
And sorry, just to clarify, but the side-by-side provision that you were talking about, can you just explain a bit more what that looks like and what type of provision that would be with?
Certainly. Side by Side is a PMLD school that operates in Hackney at the moment. It's an independent school, but is being judged good, I believe, Joe, by Ofsted. It's judged as good by Ofsted. Joe and I visited in, I think it was my second week, and they're a very good school that is offering a good standard of education for the community they serve. So we're working closely with them to see how we can expand a good example within the borough.
If I can just add something to that as well, I think another strand to our approach with that community and the number of independent schools attended is to provide more professional development input for staff working at the independent schools, so that the schools have more likelihood of falling into the good or outstanding category rather than below that, because I think that there are certain things about the curriculum that members of the Orthodox Jewish community may feel that they will only find in an independent school. But if we can ensure the teaching of core subjects is as good as possible, that will benefit the children.
Thank you. Do I have any connected questions before I you have one, Joe? Okay, Joe.
My question was connected, going back slightly to the timescales for the new provisions being planned. We're looking at September 2023.
Sorry? I didn't hear that, Joe.
Not actually sure where that's coming from.
What's happening? I'll continue. My question was, what planning is in place to provide some provision for those vulnerable children with special educational needs, particularly in view of the pandemic, who are struggling with school attendance at the moment and who are struggling to fit either into a mainstream setting or to find a specialist placement that might be suitable for them? And what are the plans to put more urgent provision in place for that group of children?
Thanks, Jo. So we are undertaking, seeking to undertake an annual review with every child or young person to make sure that following the pandemic, we have a clear oversight of the individual circumstances of every child or young person that we're looking after. Now that's a no mean feat. We have, not shy of 3,000 children, young people with plans, but we need to be able to do that for the exact purposes that you're referring to there, just to make sure that we have a clearer assessment of need across the borough and of individual cases. So we're going to be working with schools and families through the autumn term and following Christmas to make sure that we do that. And from there, we are hoping to use that to make sure that within our commissioning strategies around our services and our provision, we are really, really minded to the presenting issues and themes that are arising. So the issue around poor school attendance for girls with autism, for example, being one issue that is coming up at many meetings that we're attending at the moment, through conversations with families, through conversations with schools. That's really, really good intelligence for us to be able to make sure that as we're developing our services, we can ensure that we have the correct services, training, support in place to be able to, in a very targeted way, seek to address these issues that are arising, some of which will have been there prior to the pandemic, but others will be very much in response to what happened over the last few years. So it's all about communication. It's all about maintaining those relationships with families and settings to make sure that we are consistently reviewing what we're offering and not assuming that because something fitted prior to the pandemic, it still fits now.
Thank you very much, Fran. I've got a question from Councillor Gordon, and then I also have a question from Salma.
It's only hay fever, don't worry.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for this very comprehensive and transparent report, which I think is of great assistance to the Commission in our inquiries into this subject. I think my question is probably firstly aimed at Wendy. Obviously, we've got a very significant number of children who are currently attending, Hackney children are currently attending independent settings, a significant and growing number of children. And although our aspiration is obviously to provide more provision for this cohort of children within our own systems, there's going to be, on a long-term basis, that's still going to be the case for a lot of those children. It's unlikely to be in their interest to move them. What I'm seeking really is sort of reassurance in terms of the sort of ongoing monitoring of that existing provision, about whether we've got, the capacity to monitor the quality of that provision. Is there any of that provision that we have ongoing concerns about? I noticed in your introduction, Wendy, you said that 42% of these settings have engaged in relation to the contracts, which means the majority of them haven't. So I really just, and also, in terms of quality and financial controls going forward. So I just really want to know what we're going to be able to do to make sure that these settings provide the best possible education for our children, going forward, because some of them are going to be, in these settings on an ongoing basis for quite a significant amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Salma?
Hi. Mine is sort of linked to that question as well about the outcomes and monitoring and what is undertaken of current contracts with independent, non-maintained schools, and how this will inform future commissioning, but also that historical outcomes data for the past 5 years.
Thank you. Handing over to officers again, please.
Thank you so much. In terms of the ongoing monitoring, we the monitoring arrangements are on two levels. We've got the individual child level and the organizational level, which is the school. In terms of the child level, this is done through annual review system in place, and they check if there's been any changes in need and whether the child's needs are fully met at that independent provision, and what their outcomes, their progress and attainment is. And this is done jointly with the parents and carers, as well as our EHC coordinators. In terms of the monitoring at an organizational level, this is where the contract monitoring arrangements come into place. So yes, we've had only 42% of providers respond positively to date, but this is still in the pipeline because we've only started this piece of work in the past 6 weeks, following extensive market engagement with the market where we consulted them. In addition to that, we've also rolled out all the contract monitoring templates, so we are able to collect data returns from providers for us to understand their performance at an organizational level. So some of the quality and financial controls we have is before any provider or supplier is added to Hackney payment system, we do undertake supplier checks. Before using any of these provisions, we make sure we check their Ofsted reports, Department for Education, Section 41. We also check in terms of whether we have any other Hackney learners placed at those provisions in terms of how well they're doing around their progress and outcomes. And operationally, we also have a panel that approves each child's attendance at these provisions by ensuring that their needs will be fully met at those provisions. So going forward, what we have is we've got a dedicated senior contracts officer who started in January this year, and we are exploring, and as part of the diagnostic assessment I've undertaken, is we're exploring how best to expand this remit by focusing on actually which schools have got inadequate or requiring improvement Ofsted outcomes, and then prioritizing those, as well as prioritizing our high cost provisions to ensure that children are safe and that we are delivering value for money. One of the things we'll look at around value for money as part of the monitoring is we've asked all providers to send us a cost breakdown so we can understand and have transparent arrangements of what the fees we are paying these independent settings constitutes of. And in addition to that, we have already started negotiating fees with some of the providers, either based on volume discounts or capping some of our costs based on what we already fund, which seems reasonable, and benchmarked fees. I hope that answers your questions. I welcome any other questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really, really helpful response. And I mean, obviously, as well as going forward, we need to make sure that our, children in existing provision are getting the, the education that they need and deserve. Thank you.
And I just wondered if we have an answer to Salma's question. I'm not sure who might be best placed to answer that one about the 5-year, quite specifically, if we have an overview of the. Sorry, did you want to repeat your question, Salma, just to make sure? I think it was the.
I think Wendy did answer some of that question, but yeah, the other part of the question was really historical outcomes for the past 5 years.
Thank you. We would have that data. It would be tracked via the Pupils Annual Review over time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have other questions from the Commission? I'm conscious there's somebody behind the screen that I'm unable to see, so if someone can indicate to me if Councillor Sizer has a question. Councillor Sizer.
Am I using the microphone?
No.
Yeah, it's just a quick question. Thank you so much for the report. It's really comprehensive. How are we reaching out to the parents of SEN? I've had a few mentions of ways that we can do it, and it'd be really useful to hear going forward what the roadmap for that would be like. And how can we make sure that we're reaching out to as wide a range of parents as possible, so that it's not just one group that's very active that's being involved, but that we really are reaching as wide a group of parents as possible.
Do we have any other questions from the Commission? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, I've got sort of unrelated but also quite general question. I just wondered whether the challenges of the cyber attack has impacted any this work, and if so, how?
So back to officers, please.
So I'll start with the apologies. I couldn't completely hear, but I think the question around is around how are we working with parents in the development of the plans and ensurance that we reach a wide range of parents. So we're working with our Parent Carer Forum to make sure that we not only share information around what we know we need to achieve based on the data and the strategy that we have in place, but we also work with parents to develop that strategy. And we co-produce both on an individual level, but also on a strategic level. So through our SEND Partnership Board, where there's parental representation, we have a number of working groups where parents are invited to be involved in all aspects. So everything that we've talked about here this evening sits within the SEND priorities and within one of the work streams under the SEND programme board. So we're making sure that parents are involved with co-producing that with us. We're also really mindful that the parents that might be self-motivating to get involved in an organisation such as HIP are perhaps one group of parents that we want to work with very closely. There are also multiple groups of parents within our borough that perhaps don't have a voice or don't have an easy mechanism to be able to share their voice and get involved. So we're making sure that we work with Contact, who are an organisation that work for the DfE, to do a piece of work around mapping what mechanisms we have in the borough as a whole to glean the voice of parents. So many of our schools will have really, really good practice around parent groups, parent workshops, parent coffee mornings, and we want to do a bit of an overview of everything that's out there to make sure that we are utilising the systems that are already in place to make sure that we're reaching parents, finding out the gaps, finding out the communities that we aren't keyed into, and making sure that we access the community in different ways. So there's a number of things happening. I think we've done 4 information sessions with parents in the last few weeks, which have been so helpful. And out of those sessions, we're doing you said, we said kind of question and answer feedback, which we hope will be able to be shared with a wider group as well. It's really important that the areas of the community that perhaps we don't reach as easily, thinking examples, we've already talked about the Orthodox Jewish community, the Turkish community, where language might be a barrier to engagement. We really find ways to work with organisations, particularly the voluntary sector, that are working with parent groups through children's centres and other means to make sure that we reach out. It's not a one-size-fits-all by any means. I think it's important to note here as well, it's about working with parents, but also about the children and young people themselves. And there's some really, really good practice going on within members of the SEND service at the moment around pupil voice, around young people's voice. And we're making sure that we use those forums so that the young people themselves have an opportunity to partner with us to develop the provision that they will ultimately be potentially attending or certainly have access to. So there are a number of ways that we know that we aren't doing, we've not cracked this yet. I don't think there's any local authority that has, but we are very aspirational in order to improve and get better and keep listening and keep working with parents and getting feedback all the time. So that was the first question. Forgive me, I've forgot the second question. I don't know if anybody could.
It was about the cyber attack and whether it's impacted us. I think probably Joe, you're best placed to answer that.
Thank you. Our records weren't affected directly by the cyber attack. Obviously, it's impacted colleagues in social care. So some information we would have had from those colleagues we're having to speak to schools about, but not directly to colleagues in Hackney Education.
Thank you very much. I probably have a follow-up question to some extent to the question that Councillor Sizer asked, and this is very much focused on the new pseudo-dynamic purchasing system. It's quite a fancy name, I have to say, which we'll be putting in place. And I just wondered if there is any interface potentially for parents and carers and the children and young people who will be attending these settings to sort of, how would their input be captured somehow, and would they be able to utilize this system when it comes to them determining which setting might be best placed, for their child? How is this tool in particular going to be useful, I suppose, for children and young people quite specifically, and their parents and carers?
Thank you. So the pseudo-dynamic purchasing system, what it offers us is an opportunity to undertake pre-qualification questionnaires or accreditation checks on each provider that we end up using. So that means we will have a list of providers that have already been checked and undergone through due diligence, that we can have a resource envelope that we pick any provider to name on our EHCPs. What it provides for practitioners, first of all, is flexibility and reassurance of knowing that before they name a provision on an EHCP, that thorough checks has already been undertaken on that provider or organization. In terms of parents, carers, and the young people themselves who attend this school, as part of the consultation with schools often will welcome, and it is one of the accreditation aspects that the schools will need to offer parents, carers, or children an introductory visit or a site visit where they can have a feel of the environment and understand what the provider, the services they provide, and whether or not they fully meet the needs of that child. So in a way, the pseudo-dynamic purchasing system will not be used directly by parents, carers, or children and young people, but it is there as a system of ensuring that due diligence checks are done for every provider we end up naming on a child's EHCP.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? I think Councillor Young, I think you had your hand up at one point. I'm not sure if...
Chair, I know that she was having difficulties connecting, so... I'm
here. No, I wanted to ask a follow-up on the Orthodox Jewish provision, and you already...
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And just to reiterate, thank you so much for this really comprehensive report that's been really, really quite illuminating for us, and it's answered many questions that I think we've had over the year, and has really sort of brought a lot of the issues that we've flagged in various different meetings to the fore. And today I think we've covered quite a lot and has given us quite a lot of food for thought, I imagine, for how we can approach this further along down the line. It certainly feels like a priority given the budget constraints and the extent to which the cost pressures, our funding of independent settings, specialist independent settings in particular, the cost pressures that they bring for us as a local authority. And these aren't just experienced in terms of special educational needs. We're seeing this across the piece, especially with children and families in terms of residential settings, and also about, in relation to independent foster carers. So what I'm thinking is that it might be useful for us for the next municipal year to have on the work programme an item where we are looking specifically at the commissioning of independent settings, so that we can reflect on the implications of the introduction of the new approach to commissioning that's been outlined today. I'd be curious in particular to see, because I see mention of us, sorry, I've completely forgotten now the service that we've bought into, or we've extended our contract with. So I think it's hosted in Hertfordshire. Sorry, I've completely forgotten the name of it. But Wendy, you might be able to come in and remind me what the name is of.
CRAG, the Children Cross Regional.
That's it. I'm really curious to hear thank you very much, Wendy, the impact that has for us, especially given that we utilise this for our commissioning of residential placements, and yet we still have quite considerable issues in terms of the cost pressures that those residential settings present us. So I'm curious to know whether this is going to alleviate some of the cost pressures that we're experiencing in terms of the independent settings for special educational needs. So that feels like the logical step to take, to try and perhaps group these together. And I think we'll also hopefully have opportunity to explore many of the issues that we've flagged today in various other pieces of work that we'll be doing as a commission throughout the year. But I eagerly await seeing the impact of the introduction of this approach that has been outlined today, and would just like to thank officers for all of your efforts in putting not just the papers together, but the work that's gone into giving this level of oversight to something that's clearly been a concern for you, as much of a concern for you as it has been for local residents, parents and carers. So thank you very much. So I think we're now going to move on to item 5, which is the Budget Monitoring Children and Families Service. A key function of the scrutiny process is to undertake budget monitoring of local services, and annual reports are taken each year from directorates covered by this commission. Today, the commission has the budget monitoring report for the Children and Families Service, which provides full outturn figures for the financial year ending March 2021. For this item, I would like to introduce Nadeem Ahmed, the Director of Finance for Children and Families, Diane Benjamin, the Director of Children and Families, Lisa Aldridge, the Head of Safeguarding and Learning, and Hugh Bevan, the Head of Family Intervention and Support Service. We have 30 minutes for this item, so can I ask officers to present key issues from the report for 5 minutes, then we can have 25 minutes for questions. Thank you. Handing over to officers.
Sure, Diane, are you happy for me to get started?
I am. That would be lovely.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Nadeem Ahmed. I'm Director of Finance, and I'm here to talk to you about the provisional outturn for the 2021 financial year. Key to stress that this is provisional. However, we don't anticipate any material movements on this position. So when this report was produced, where we were at in terms of the monitoring cycle, this was the provisional outturn. But since then, it hasn't changed at all. So still valid at this stage. So in terms of the Children's Services outturn position for 2021, the final outturn was an overspend of £3.3 million. And that was after application of reserves totaling almost 7 million. I guess the key issue last financial year was the impact of COVID-19 expenditure on our overall position, and we estimate that accounted for about 2 million of that overall overspend. So I guess if all things being equal, if we didn't have COVID, we would have had an overspend in the region of 1.3 to 1.5 million. In terms of the reserves that I earlier outlined, the 7 million. So 3.86 million was from commissioning reserves. So this is a corporate reserve that's set up in advance of the start of the year. So in advance of the start of the year, we undertake a zero-based budgeting exercise, which essentially looks at the cost of placements based on a snapshot at that time in the year, and then compares it to the budget, which comes up with a figure, a gap essentially, which is normally what we would then request from corporate reserve. So that was to the tune of 3.86 million, and that was fully funded and fully utilised last financial year. And then there was an additional 1.6 million for additional staffing required to address a combination of increased demand across the service and management response to the recommendations from the Ofsted inspection back in November 2019. So essentially, this report talks through some of the overspends, I guess some of the material overspends that are the kind of ups and downs that have occurred during the year. So if I highlight the key ones, so I've touched on corporate parenting, and I guess this is the two large areas essentially of overspend in the service are around placements and corporate parenting, and in staffing predominantly as we respond to increased demand and respond to the Ofsted inspection. So corporate parenting is probably the largest area of overspend. So I guess the gross overspend is in the region of about £4 million, and that's after the use of the 3.9 million of corporate commissioning reserves that I previously outlined. So what's happened over the last few years is that there's been social care grant funding that's been allocated by central government, and that has increased year on year. So in 2021, the total position included, where is it? It says it in the report. So the total funding that was awarded to the local authority was in the region of 9.3 million, and locally we made a decision to split the funding equally between children's social care and adult social care. So each service got 4.6 million, and that's reflected in this net position. So a big bulk of that essentially went into funding additional placements within the service. But I guess the concern with that is it's not a sustainable funding solution really for a service. So that funding has increased this financial year in 21-22 to almost 12.5 million. So 6.3 million for each service. But again, it's not a sustainable funding solution for a service. So something to flag. So within corporate parenting, I guess that there's a lot of areas of high cost. One of the areas that has cost pressures is in residential care. So on average, a residential placement costs approximately £200,000 per year. And at this point, I think there was approximately 40 children in a residential setting, which obviously has a significant cost pressure to the service, and something that we've been looking at forensically with Annie Call as the interim director to try to understand, I guess, essentially why those children were in care, and if any steps can be taken to step them down into other settings. And then probably one other point to flag is around fostering. So I guess we've got an in-house fostering model, and then obviously we've had to utilise independent fostering agencies as well. But independent fostering agencies cost almost twice as much. So the average cost of an IFA, an independent fostering agency placement, is 50k. As opposed to in-house fostering placements, which is about 25k. So where we can utilise them, we have tried to keep children in those in-house settings, but I think that's become increasingly more challenging over the years. And then I guess the other big areas of overspend in terms of staffing are in children in need. So the overspend in children in need was about 800k after the use of reserves. So significant levels of social care grant funding went in there, but essentially a lot of that's linked to staffing pressures within the service. Disabled Children's Service was overspending by about 800,000 as well, and that was after the use of quite significant reserves. So an element of that was linked to staffing, but the large element is essentially linked to commissioning activity. So we've seen increase, and we continue to see increase in demand for home care services, direct payments, and short breaks, and that trajectory seems to have been on the upward trend over the last 3 years, I'd say. So partly that's been offset by the directorate management position. So we had an underspend there, and I think that underspend looks larger than it is, partly because some of the costs that have been incurred in additional staffing for post Ofsted resources have essentially been funded from this 944k. So the funding just hasn't been distributed to the various services. Yeah, so parenting support was another area that was underspending, and that was largely as a result of a public health contribution and various underspends in non-staffing costs. Young Hackney was underspent, and that was partly due to delayed COVID activity. So there was a delay in the opening of the multi-use games area, and obviously the staffing associated with that as well. Clinical services was underspent by 217k. Most of these underspends are linked to staffing delays, essentially. And then that was something similar in safeguarding and learning. That underspend was largely attributed to delays in recruitment and unavoided expenditure linked to COVID activity. So we haven't had to hire as many physical facilities for training, which is something I guess the service are going to look at going forward to see where, as we shift to do more online training, essentially. The next part of the report highlights the management actions to reduce costs, and some of these actions have been revisited in 21-22, and what we've tried to do is, I guess, quantify them a bit more explicitly. So some of the actions in this report, so joint funding of health and social care packages is something that we've now taken forward as a savings proposal. So we're working very closely with the CCG to try and identify children with healthcare needs and try to ensure that there's a contribution towards their health and social care package, essentially. So we've set up the post-16 commissioning panel, which is an agency which involves children, education, and CCG colleagues to essentially review some of those children and try and arrange funding splits for the cost of their care, essentially. Review and reduction in high cost placements as part of budget review meetings. So as I mentioned earlier, the kind of high cost nature of children's placements and the kind of, I guess partly that's linked to the size of the market. The market's really small, so therefore you're at the mercy of providers often. So often the cost can be quite high linked to that. So we review them on a monthly basis as part of budget review meetings that are chaired by myself and the Director of Children's Service. So we look at all of those placements through a financial lens to see what we can do to reduce costs and come up with tangible management action plans to do that. And then some of the other initiatives, so Mockingbird project and supported lodging, so how we can extend the family model to deliver foster care with an emphasis on respite care and peer support. Flip and Edge of Care is some of the other initiatives that we're doing. So the work undertaken over the year, looking at the Flip model and Edge of Care workers aimed at preventing children and young people coming into care and trying to support them back into their families. And then another area, as I alluded to earlier in the report, is around challenges linked to staffing pressure. So through Workforce Development Board, we're trying to monitor staffing levels, I guess, from a strategic perspective and understand when we're using additional resources and how we can better understand the link to demand coming into the service and almost flex resources within the service when we need to. So yeah, I think that's a summary of where we've been linked to children's social care for last year. So yeah, the overall position was an overspend of 3.3 million, but 2 million of it's largely attributed to COVID. We've done a lot of work since this report has been produced in terms of cost reduction plans. So if I'm invited to come back to a future scrutiny meeting, I can take you through them in a bit more detail. But yeah, I guess the focus really is going to be on placements and staffing as Diana's come into role, and trying to see what we can do collectively to try and reduce some of the cost pressures within the service.
Thank you very much, Naeem, both for the report and the summary. I can't emphasise just how important it is for us as a scrutiny commission to have oversight of this level of detail of the budget monitoring. It really does illuminate and bring to life for us the various different challenges that are faced by services, and helps us to preempt the direction of travel based on the pressures that are evident. So now going to hand over to the Commission for some questions. So we've got 2 hands up remotely. So can we start with Councillor Selman and then Councillor Young, please?
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks, Naeem. I had 2 questions. The first was in relation to the £2 million overspend linked to COVID-related measures. It was whether we had a further breakdown of that in terms of things that we'd identified as one-off COVID costs, and how much we thought were ongoing COVID costs that we're going to have to continue to budget for going into the next financial year. And then the second question, which isn't necessarily the point of the report, so I understand if it needs to be one of your colleagues that picks up on this, but there's a reference to the no recourse to public funds, that there had been a reduction in applications that we'd received in relation to that. I'm aware that we'd been trying very hard during COVID to make sure that people still had routes to refer across to the NRPF team if it was needed. So I was just keen to understand a bit further what was sitting behind that, and if we had any concerns about reduction in number of people approaching the council, for example, circumstances where they really should still be accessing NRPF. That's all. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, so in terms of the...
Sorry, Dave, can we just take one more question from Councillor Young before you answer, if that's okay? Thank you.
So mine's on quite a different bit of the spending, so apologies for that. I wanted to ask a bit about the semi-independent care placements, and what, I mean, you've said that there's an increase in demand, and obviously there's an increase in budget, both for under and over 18s. Can you tell us a bit more about the factors, or can one of you tell us a bit more about what's, what underlies that, what's causing that, those increases, and also what options do we have in the council to sort of, to help to limit those costs, or how elastic are those costs for semi-independent placements? It's such a difficult area of young people's lives.
Sure. Shall I answer the COVID question, then I'll pass on to colleagues for the other elements. So yeah, in terms of COVID elements, I think the bulk of them this year has essentially been additional resources in terms of staffing on a short-term basis and delays in placement. So essentially what we've seen is children aren't as able to step down from settings. So a lot of it, I think, is short-term, but essentially we've worked through it again this year. So we've almost taken stock in 21-22 to kind of understand the longer-term implications. But I would say the bulk of the costs, the bulk of the 2 million were one-off costs. And we don't anticipate that level of COVID-related expenditure. I say that in advance of a potential third wave. But I guess what we're doing is different scenario models. So, for instance, doing a lot of work to try and understand if there was potentially a third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave, what kind of implication it could potentially have on the budget. So there's a lot of scenario modelling that's happening in the background to try and, I guess, anticipate what further constraints there could be on the budget, or what further pressures there could be on the budget linked to COVID. So a lot of that work is still ongoing, if I'm honest.
Colleague, shall I come in on this semi-independent question? Maybe that's helpful for Councillor Young. For those who don't know me, Ben, I think you probably all do. I'm Annie Coyle, and it's lovely that Diana's with you this evening as the new permanent director, and I've moved over to do some project work for Ofsted. That's why I'm still with you for now. Councillor Young, we did, myself and Laura Bellini did quite a forensic review, both of our semi-independent accommodated children and of our children in residential children's homes. And you'll note that I talk about residential homes rather than placements, really. It's really, there were 46 children that we looked at in semi-independent accommodation, and about the same for residential children's homes. It's been a really great piece of work. I think we've learned an awful lot as a service, and clearly some of those young people entered semi-independent accommodation we looked at the children over the last year. And for some of those young people, some of our lessons have been about, where young people and that assessment at the front door and a joint assessment between children's social care and housing, where for some young people who are just below 18 and actually have resilience, and actually it's a homelessness issue, although a highly sensitive one when we consider that for children, that actually we've done quite a bit of work around more of a joint assessment approach. And Hugh can come in and talk a little bit more about some of what we've done with housing on that. But actually what we see, and Naeem is right, we have, really limited fostering care for our troubled and troublesome young people, 16, 7 and 17. When we looked at the semi-independent children, we could see for a majority of them, there were emergency accommodation issues. Our learning about that is how the emergency accommodation issues didn't turn it then into a kind of permanent arrangement for children. And that actually the quality of our assessment is really important once we've got children in something like semi-independent living. So we've done an awful lot of work with the front end of children's social care, that initial assessment about children, and Lisa can pick up in terms of the independent reviewing officers role when we're looking at looked after children's reviews, to always have an eye to thinking about, actually, when we didn't know this child when they came in as an emergency, what do we now know about them? And actually help to sometimes reset what presents as a troubled young or troublesome young person, and in fact they are troubled, and actually to reset their story and to really promote fostering, because actually what we want is for those young people to either return home successfully and we re-engage those family networks, or actually for them to be in staying put and fostering arrangements so that they are safer, closer and whatever. One of the important issues that came out of our semi-independent accommodation review was that I was concerned about the quality, what we made and where were we at with the quality of semi-independent accommodation. And actually, I'm really pleased to be able to say to you that actually Hackney only goes for really high quality semi-independent accommodation. And out of the 46 children that we looked at, I wasn't worried about the provider in their own right. Elsewhere, in a previous director job up north, I did a similar exercise, and it led to us shutting down a semi-independent accommodation provider. So I think it's really important reassurance for you to know that there are some young people that we believe should be would be better cared for in foster care, but we've got quite a big piece of work to do to help recruit carers who actually want to step forward for 16 and 17-year-olds. And we have to be really mindful about the trap that young people sometimes think, that's it, I've arrived and now I'm independent and I'm off to get my own flat. So huge amounts of learning. It's an exercise that the corporate parenting service will do once every 6 months, so that we're completely on top of it, as well as the much higher level of scrutiny that exists throughout the system, which we'll talk to you a bit more about when we do the Ofsted Action Plan update.
Good evening, everyone.
Sorry, please add something. I wasn't sure that quite answered the question I asked.
Okay, apologies. Do you want to ask me your question again, Councillor?
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to know what the factors were that you found that were underlying those increases in placements.
So I think it's important so in the last 7 months, last 3 months in particular, we've not had an increase of young people in semi-independent accommodation. Over the last 18 months, yes, but not in the last 3 to 6 months. And that's been about the tightness of our front door, engaging families, being less keen to just bring our young people in that kind of frenetic emergency. Because actually our practice has improved much more about that, and actually holding parents and carers to account for not just rejecting their 16 and 17-year-old when things are difficult. And instead, what we can show you is a bit more evidence around an open dialogue approach with children and their families, even if they are 16 and 17. Is that helpful? Did I get there in the end? Okay, that's good.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I was just going to come back to Councillor Selma's question as well about nil recourse. Just to say, we have seen a recent increase, a very small increase in families presenting with nil recourse that we're assessing and we're offering ongoing support to. I haven't got the figures to hand, but I can come back to you on that. Linked to that as well is that we're delivering a project with the What Works Centre for Children and the University of Wolverhampton called No Ream, which is about an early intervention project with families that potentially may have nil recourse. So increasing awareness in the community, as well as with our partner agencies about who to refer in, when, how to make families aware of the resources available to them. So we can send more details about that as well, if that's helpful.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Can I just check, do we have a sense that the reduction that we saw, are we attributing that to the barriers that people experienced due to COVID? Or do we not know?
I think so, and obviously the changes in border restrictions and things like that.
Got a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. The first to Naeem, and that was actually about the areas of underspend that we've experienced as a result of COVID, and what our forecasting is for future years, and in fact actually how this year's budget may have fared had there not been underspend in those areas, and what the extent of the overspend may have could well have looked like this year. And I then also have a question about the residential care placements. And actually, Annie, thank you for pointing out that we should not be referring to them as placements, because the young people in the borough have expressed that these are their homes and that they don't like the term placement to be used to refer to their homes. So residential care homes is what I'd quite like us to refer to them as now. I'd quite like, it would be really useful if we can give the Commission a better understanding of what these homes are like. Where are they? Where are they? Because I think that that's actually quite important. And the reason why I say this is, in my day job, I do work with young people who are placed in such homes, and I'm aware that they can be very far away from here. And I think that there is a question mark, not just around the costs of these homes, but about how useful it is, not useful, it doesn't sound like a strong enough term to use, but the impact that dislocating a child or a young person from their context of London, of Hackney, of a diverse community where they have friends and family and where they know people, to possibly Wales or Cheshire or Liverpool, which is not unheard of. So it would be useful if we could get a sense of actually where these homes are. And I'd be curious also to know, do we have any intention of building our own homes that are closer? Because this seems to be a persisting demand for us, and it feels as though it would make sense for us to have a localised response to this that doesn't involve dislocating children from their contexts. So sorry, there's a few questions there. So could we start perhaps with those, and then we'll move on to, I think, Councillor Gordon and Shabnam, who also have questions.
So shall I pick
Yeah,
up where you left off? That makes sense.
Yes, please.
Okay, no worries. So I haven't got in front of me exactly where our children's homes are. I can provide that information. In fact, it'd be maybe helpful to provide the Commission with a bit of a map, and we can do some dots around where you can see our children are. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really, really important that we keep our children close and we keep them safe and we keep them protected, really. For some of our young people who are in children's homes, their needs are highly complex, and that the provision for highly complex young people, often we are fishing in a very small pond. And we have a wonderful Maria, who is our placement placements unit manager, who has a very strong relationship with the providers. And I just want to assure the Commission that we don't just agree to any placement that happens to come, that there is a sense of matching everyone's needs. One of the things that we've done in undertaking the forensic review of children's home care arrangements was we had each social worker in with their manager. They met with me and they met with Laura as our head of corporate parenting and Maria, and also their independent reviewing officer was there. And what we were able to do is to really go through what was happening for that child's lived experience. And when residential children's homes were talking about therapeutic involvement for children, aligned to their plan, so that we could see the progression of children settling in order for us to be able to bring children back and bring them close, and ideally bring them back into foster care. Out of the 40 children that we looked at, I think there were only about 4 children that we could identify foster care wasn't the right plan for them, and that actually their needs were very, very highly complex and being met very, very well despite the distance. And it's really important that what we do is make sure that we've got their family really tightly and well connected, and that we're really clear about holistically what those children need. But they're really interesting, fascinating piece of work, and we have done a write-up of that review, which I'm quite happy to share with the Commission, and then have Laura back to be able to talk to you a bit about the distance across the country, perhaps might be helpful. Does that answer? Is that all right? Is there
it does, although I suppose I'm just thinking that we've got 40 odd children that are currently in these residential homes, and by the sounds of it, from the assessment, it seems as though most of these children could be placed in foster care, or we hope that they could be placed in foster care. Is that it?
What I would say to you is that actually none of those children have are children whose needs are not high. Otherwise we would have them in our fostering cohort already. And for a number of those children, the first protocol is always about foster care in our own provision, and then independent fostering arrangements if we're not able to provide for that locally as possible. For some young people, there is a need to be placed outside of London, but the aim is to bring them back and bring them close once we're able to intervene intensively, therapeutically, and take down some of the risks that children have either been presented with in the local area, or actually some of their own behaviours mean that they place themselves at risk, really. What I'm saying to you is it's really, really important that we look at every looked after children's review to be able to look at, does the care arrangement meet their need? And actually, is there a way of us meeting their need back closer to home and closer connected? So I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression that we've just kind of put children out there and actually we could bring them back, and we haven't. The residential children's review will happen once every 6 months, akin to the semi-independent review, so that actually we're really, really clear about that. And the role of the independent reviewing officer is even more pivotal. You did ask a question about should we build our own children's homes and what would be the complexity around that. Well, we are part of a North London consortium where there is a children's home. We have, Lisa, I'm looking at you, I think there are 3 of them, 3 homes. And of course, these are children's homes. And sometimes when we have children's whose lived experience means that they are experiencing quite a lot of trauma, we've got to be really careful about how we match a child in that position with a settled children's home where children's needs are being met. So the matching of children is really important, and we don't want to disrupt either our own children or children's homes locally. So I just want to give you some reassurance. There were a couple of vacancies in that children's home in the last 6 weeks. 2 of the children that we had to accommodate in a residential children's home, their needs would not have been met by that local children's home. They would have disrupted other of our own children. So it's a really complex landscape, this. Our key in terms of our practice is to absolutely know that we've got the right plan in place for children, that we have a high level of contact with our children, and that we're commissioning therapeutic involvement for our children in residential children's homes, that we know the quality of that, and that actually it helps to settle our children in order that we can bring them back and bring them close and bring them back into the community.
Thank you very much for the answer to my initial question, because I have to say, every time I hear that figure of £200,000, I just find it so painful to read. And the reason being is that at the crux of so many of our families' issues that they experience is poverty. And to think that we could actually buy them a home for that price, and instead we have families who are enduring temporary accommodation for years upon years, and the impact of poverty, only to then spend £200,000 to accommodate their children after the full impact of the devastation that poverty yields on our families is felt by the children. It just sits so badly with me, as I'm sure it will do with officers and other members alike. So it's something that I'm so keen, as I'm sure the rest of the Commission are, to really see some movement in, and to see some innovation about how we might be able to address this, because we obviously can't, from a financial perspective, continue to spend this money. But I also don't think we can continue to justify actually spending that money when the impact of poverty is not really being, we're unable to address it with tight budgets in other sections of the council, the work that we do at the earlier stage in terms of interventions for families. Just wondered, Naeem, if I could have an answer to that question.
Sorry. Yeah, of course.
No,
Could you repeat it for me, if you don't mind?
it's just about the areas of underspend, really, and just wondering actually what our budget would have looked like this year had we not underspent in those areas, and actually what the forecast would be for future years, for next year, for example, when I imagine if COVID restrictions have been fully lifted for the whole year, we won't have experienced the same level of underspend in those areas.
Yeah, so I guess obviously the report flags that the kind of COVID pressures in this financial year were obviously a lot more extreme than the underspends that we had. So the areas of underspend weren't huge, to be honest with you, but I guess what I'd probably say, so they're mainly linked to safeguarding and learning, linked to training and room hire, and then the other area really linked to COVID was the delay in the opening of the multi-use games area in Young Hackney. So probably what I would say is, those underspends did happen. I guess what we're probably doing proactively across the service is almost looking at some of the opportunities linked to COVID. So where we can undertake a bit more hybrid training, doing things a bit more online, trying to manage that, I guess, as well, because actually one thing that it has done is almost highlight opportunities where you're saving time in travel, and the technology allows you to set up breakout rooms and do things quite quickly and quite rapidly, actually. So yeah, there were some underspends. I guess what we're now doing in the new financial year is almost exploring some of those opportunities across the entire council to see whether we can make the most of them going forward, and actually there's some learning that we can benefit from on a longer term setting.
Thank you very much, Naeem. I now have questions from Councillor Gordon and then Shabnam.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question, I think, is really for Naeem. Thanks very much for really detailed and really helpful presentation. You've touched on the very significant dependency on reserves in terms of this budget. And I was just wondering whether you see that as a sort of, and I appreciate you are trying to do things to address this, but how sustainable that's going to be as a position going forward. And also, I don't know whether you were present for the earlier part of the meeting. I mean, we did hear, we had some discussion in terms of the innovation that's going on in relation to the procurement for places in independent settings. I wonder whether there is any sort of learning across these two branches of children's services and collaboration in relation to best practice in terms of procurement and monitoring of these types of services. Thank you.
Thank you. And before you come in, can we take a question from Shabnam, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my question is about independent fostering placements and how they're increasing, whereas in-house fostering placements are stagnating. I'd like to ask why that might be, and what strategies are being employed to kind of increase recruitment and retention of in-house fostering placements. Carers, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the first questions, yeah, I guess the challenge really is the kind of uncertainty from central government in terms of setting a longer term budget, especially for social care. I mean, the demand seems to be coming like a wave, and it's incredibly challenging across all of social care to try and manage it as it is in education, to be honest with you. So it's a real challenge. What we're trying to do locally is work on an internal 3-year budget plan cycle, essentially, which looks at a lot of those funding streams and does some, I guess, demand planning over that 3-year period to understand what our cost pressures are likely to be over the 3 years. So we've started that exercise currently, and we hope to finalise that over the summer period. And essentially, then we'll sit down with directors of service to kind of explore that in a bit more detail, and then to come up with some cost reduction plans to try and bring the budget back in line, essentially. So I think the first step is essentially getting to a point where we're clear collectively as officers what we think the budget pressure is going to be over the 3-year period, and then we work collectively then to try and address those cost pressures. But yeah, I guess I mean, my feeling, my gut feeling is that the social care grant will continue in its current form and will likely increase slightly year on year, but it's obviously very difficult to plan on that basis, and I think that's the real difficulty. We really do need a sustainable funding solution for social care going forward. In terms of those opportunities and exploring kind of procurement opportunities, yeah, that's part of our cost reduction plan for the current financial year, the new financial year. So what we're doing is looking at some of those opportunities. So where we are paying £200,000 to residential care home providers, we're sitting down with them, engaging with them and saying, right, give us an itemized breakdown of exactly what we're paying for. So, there might be an instance where we're paying for a child to be in that setting for 24 hours of the day, but actually 9 to 5 they're going to a school or something like that during the day, so we're almost double paying at times. So I guess what we're trying to do is explore some of those opportunities and really look at the costs that we're paying for a bit more forensically, and then that's shaping our model going forward, essentially. So yeah, we are slightly at the whim of the children's social care market. It's a lot smaller, but actually we can push back and look at some of those placements as they become more stable to explore what costs we're exactly paying for, and then as part of that package how we can step those children out of those care home settings back into Hackney, essentially into local settings. In terms of the IFA question, Annie, did you want to pick that up? On mute.
You know when you think you just don't do it, but hey, here you go. So it's something that we are super conscious of, and we want to be able to grow our own foster carers and train them to meet actually what are the kind of local needs of our children. But so just as an example, when you ask what we're doing about it, we've currently got live 15 households being assessed in terms of foster carers for in-house fostering. Of course, they are households, and that's the way that we talk about them rather than foster carers, because multiple children can end up, if that's successful. We did actually do a kind of realignment of the fostering service over the last 6 months, because we used to have a recruitment team and then the fostering social workers. But our fostering service is now aligned so that the fostering social workers undertake a proportion of fostering assessments. And the reason for doing that is that when a foster carer gets through that assessment and they're ready to have a child with them, that they experience a sense of consistency from the fostering social worker who did the assessment and knows them well, so also knows how to support them through their first placement onwards. I think it's a really helpful thing to understand, because actually that's the thing that retains foster carers. So whilst we have a sense of recruitment, we have to think about how do we support our foster carers to stay with us for a long time. There's a whole range of other things that the fostering team have been doing around various platforms of media. But actually what the fostering service say in Hackney is that one of their best recruitment opportunities is often word of mouth. And that very recently we were looking at a campaign across the council and thinking about how many council workers there are and actually how much more opportunity there is out there. In the fostering world, there's a lot of conversations at the moment around the impact of COVID. It's helped people to really rethink how they want to live their life. And lots of people are now coming forward. Is the conversation in the fostering network about there being a bit more opportunity for people to become foster carers now, having just stepped back a bit from life and taking a kind of sense of, thought about what they want to do with their life. So we want to be able to jump on the bandwagon of that and see how many foster carers we can, the right foster carers. We have a particular issue, I think I was trying to allude to earlier on, about our teenagers, and that often we have, it is more easy to recruit foster carers for younger children, but actually it's for our teenagers as well. We know that that's our cohort of children that are more likely to come into our care, really. So the other thing to say to you is that we now have a permanent recruitment manager who's now in post and is working closely with the North London Consortium, so that there's a real sense of best practice across North London and that we're not in isolation from what others are doing.
Thank you very much.
I just have a plea for fewer acronyms, because I don't know what they all are. I'm not sure the 3 new members of the Commission don't either. Because I didn't actually hear what the answer was to my question about what was the acronym.
It was independent fostering, so it was an acronym for independent fostering. So yes, just I don't know if you all heard that, but just a plea for to not use acronyms if possible, or to provide shiny glossaries as was provided in one of the previous items. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Gordon?
It's not actually to my question, it's probably more to Shabnam's, if that's okay. We have been sort of hearing reports of the challenges in recruiting foster carers. Commission for quite a significant period of time now. One of the big challenges I think is the cost of housing across all tenures. For families seeking to become foster parents. Obviously I do appreciate it's a big problem with no simple solution, but I don't know whether there are any efforts at all made to address that in any part of the policy for recruitment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I might be able to answer that. So yeah, one of the initiatives that we've been looking at, obviously the challenge is bedrooms, essentially, really for carers and space within households. So one of the initiatives that we've been looking at is possibly to secure some capital funding for essentially for extensions to carers' properties, essentially, because the payback period, obviously, you'll see when you compare the 50k to the 25k is quite short. And actually, if there weren't sufficient carers in the borough, then obviously they might need to then step into residential settings, and obviously you're all aware that the cost is significantly more. So actually the payback period in terms of an extension onto somebody's property, I don't know, possibly going into the loft, the payback period is quite short, and actually it's an innovative way to support our foster carers and try and keep children in the borough. So that's something that we've currently exploring at the moment. There's some carers that have come forward, and that's something we're just kind of working through the logistics of exactly how it's going to work. So that funding's given to them, and I guess the kind of contractual relationship with the local authority. So are they committing to continue to care for a set period of time afterwards? So yeah, that's one of the innovative things that we're doing, which I'm really excited about, essentially.
Which I suppose is dependent on people living in homes that can be, that have lofts, because I'm sure that many of the homes don't have lofts, and to what I understand, actually a large proportion of the foster carers in the borough are social housing tenants. So obviously much of this has been impacted by the pressures that we have on the social housing that we have available in the borough. But again, it feels like there is an opportunity. There must be an opportunity for us to work a bit more closely with our partners in housing, given the amount of money that we are spending currently on the residential homes. Again, we could be building homes in the borough to specifically accommodate the needs of foster carers potentially, although I appreciate that that's not quite how the finances work within the borough, but it feels like a logical solution to me. Do you have a follow-up question, Councillor Hanson?
You've made the first of the points I was going to make about it's all well to say you could have a loft extension if you have a loft. I guess I was going to raise a related point as well, which is, I have taken up casework from people who've said, I wish to become a foster carer. Can I be rehoused, because I can't be considered until such time as I do have a spare room. But the housing department say, well, we can't consider you for rehousing in a larger property unless you're currently in housing need. So it's about the sequencing of how that would work. I suppose, let's say someone is an owner-occupier but wants to get an extension and we consider giving them a grant, there would be this sort of contractual, for want of a better issue. I've had this in a workplace situation, for example, where we paid towards someone's college course, but it was a condition of receiving that money that they continued to work for us for a certain length of time afterwards. And if they left, they had to pay it back. But in practice, if someone leaves, getting them to pay it back is virtually impossible, however many contracts they've signed. So I do have some concerns about the sort of enforceability of the contractual arrangement and the potential cost of recovering the money if people took it and then didn't fulfill that. I'm not saying I think it's a terrible idea from start to finish, but I do have a number of concerns, Chair, including the one you yourself raised.
It feels like this might be something that we might be able to explore potentially with our colleagues in living in Hackney.
I'd also be very interested to know, Chair, if it's been tried anywhere else and what the results had been.
Without wanting to make this a debate, I think it may be easier if there's a possibility of a charge on the land, but I haven't really thought of. Yeah, so.
I can see there could be circumstances where it could work, but I think in Hackney they may possibly be more limited than elsewhere. When you consider the percentage of Hackney residents that live in social housing, how high that is compared with other parts of the country, I'd have thought, on the distribution of this, we'd be down one end.
It does feel like this is something that would be quite useful for us to explore, although I appreciate that we have already, as part of our review into the recruitment and retention of foster carers, as it's an issue though that is persisting, and when we look at it against the cost pressures for accommodating our children and young people in foster care homes and residential homes, it feels as though this might be something that we might actually be able to explore with our colleagues in Living Hackney Scrutiny Commission as part of the ongoing work looking at allocations. So sorry, I think we've got Shabnam who wants to come in, presumably again on the point that she made previously. And I think, Joe, did you?
My question's been covered.
Question's been covered. So then I think we'll just have Shabnam, and then I think we'll have to move on to the next item.
Thank you very much. It's just to follow up on my question. I did hear, well, thank you very much to Annie as well for answering that. It's good to hear about the permanent recruitment manager and the continuity of care for, in terms of the fostering social worker. I would like a little bit more clarity though in terms of retention, CPD and so on for foster carers, and what is being done in terms of that, because I think that's probably a greater issue than attracting foster carers. As you said before, there's a lot of interest in it, but obviously making sure that you've got the right one is the primary concern. But then retention needs to be a factor in that as well. So I just wanted a little bit more clarity in that, please.
Sure. So we've got quite a comprehensive. Sorry, Councillor Bramble, you want to come in?
Oh, thank you, Annie. I can come in after you. That's fine.
I was just saying that we've got quite a comprehensive training programme for our foster carers. And in fact, our fostering social spend a significant amount of their time, not only supporting our foster carers, but training them and updating their training. I'm quite happy to just show the fostering training programme to the Commission. Maybe that would be helpful for you. But so there is an issue around retention, you are right, but also we've got to retain the right foster carers, and that fostering in 2020-21 for some of the challenges that our adolescents face in particular actually is something that our foster carers need to catch up on. And we know that contextual safeguarding can often be a really big issue around the breaking of a fostering relationship with a child. Sometimes because our foster carers worry that if we have children who start to go missing, that they're not being protective of them. And then the worst thing that happens is that they give notice for that fostering arrangement to end, when in fact what we want them to do is to stick by our children or more, really, when we've got children that do that. But I think it can't be underestimated at how amazing our foster carers are, actually, and how much they have to sit with that turmoil and turbulence that happens in children's lives. And that's the job of our fostering social workers, is to hold them through that uncertainty. But I think we do have a particular issue in Hackney about a cohort of amazing foster carers who actually are anxious about caring for our teenagers. And so we've certainly done a lot of work with them around just understanding some of the things that lead to contextual safeguarding and that importance of relationship-based fostering and sticking with our children. We've got some amazing carers who can manage that really well. So the kind of peer mentoring across foster carers and lowering that sense of anxiety is also another part of that kind of landscape. But if it is helpful, I'm happy to share the fostering training programme so that you have some reassurance about some of that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, all I wanted to quickly add, Councillor Conway, thank you, Annie, was there's a variety of things that are in place. There is a strategy on how we promote and advertise to get more foster carers, but equally what we do to support existing foster carers. So you have the Mockingbird hubs that support foster carers, and where you are a new foster carer, you are teamed up with a more experienced foster carer to help you in that setting. We have a training app that was launched sometime last year that foster carers can have training that's accessible to them at the time they want to them. We've enhanced our bespoke training model for foster carers, and one of the things that I introduced after speaking to foster carers that officers went off to develop was a non-academic pathway to be accredited a level 3, which is acknowledged within the borough. And foster carers do an array of tasks, including producing a portfolio to ensure that they can demonstrate the skills and ability to have that accreditation. And to me, that's something that foster carers really wanted. We tried to get accredited, and it hasn't been that straightforward, but definitely within the borough, we acknowledge it, and it's a way to enumerate foster carers that want to take that progression but don't necessarily want to go to college or go on to university. So there's an array of things that we're continuing to think about and develop, but part of that is always going to foster carers and hearing from them directly. What do you want and need from that? And then that's why I asked officers to develop that. And Annie, I think, 10 people have gone through that route, through that new route that we've developed. So yeah, just thank you to officers for working with me on that.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all officers who have contributed this evening. The report was really very illuminating for us as a commission, and so too were your responses to the questions that were asked, and we covered a lot of ground, from COVID to no recourse to public funds, semi-independent and residential homes. In terms of going forward, the corporate parenting budget has been an area of significant budgetary pressure for a number of years, and the Commission will keep oversight with a view to contributing towards strategic response. And this will come, hopefully, as part of our work this municipal year, on our review that will be looking at adolescents entering the care system, where it's likely that we will be focusing and exploring on residential and semi-independent care options for children and young people in the borough. But I look forward again to having this come back to us again next year, and to continuing our work on having oversight of budget monitoring. So thank you very much to officers. We're now moving on to the next item, which is item 6, the action plan arising from Ofsted inspection. Ofsted inspected the Children and Family Service in Hackney in November of 2019, where children's social care was judged to require improvement. 6 areas were identified as requiring improvement. These are detailed on the agenda front sheet. Children and Families Service developed a children's social care action plan in response to the Ofsted inspection. The Commission therefore maintains oversight of this action plan to ensure that progress and improvement is being maintained. We have 2 reports for this item. Firstly, the update on the Children's Social Care Action Plan, and secondly is an update on the unit model of children's social care. For this item, we have Diane Benjamin. We also have Diane Benjamin, who is our new Director of Children's Social Care. We have Lisa Aldridge, who is Head of Safeguarding and Learning Support, and Hugh Bevan, the Head of Family Intervention and Support Service. I'd like to suggest that we first take the Children's Social Care Action Plan, if we can then take some questions from the Commission before moving on to the review of the Hackney model. So if we can please start with a quick summary of the Children's Social Care Action Plan from officers. I think Councillor Bramwell, did you want to come in initially?
Just quickly, Chair, just to say that I know that just want to thank staff that have worked on the action plan, looking at those 6 points. And I think as an organisation, as a council, we've all been on a journey to get through this process, and absolutely want to work to ensure we do the best thing for our children and young people, giving them the best start that we can. I think one of the things that I would say is that we try to make this process as open and transparent as possible. And if you go on the council website, there is an action plan that we've tried to make accessible for the public to just talk about what we are doing and how. And there was a forward from myself and the mayor, and that isn't accidental. That, you know, the mayor chairs with me our oversight board, where members sit on that as well, where we are looking at that progress, interrogating data, inquiring and questioning, and seeing together how we can ensure that we are making the developmental steps that we need on this action plan. But just thought I'd mention that. Thank you, Chair. And thanking Atticus as well for the work that he's done. If you haven't, I'm sure you've seen it, but if you haven't, it's a really good document to really help the public access what we're doing, but also a way for the community to be able to hold us to account. Thank you.
Great, and thank you very much, Councillor Bramble, for the introduction. So I'm going to start with reference to some of our papers and then hand over to colleagues. So I know members have all seen the presentation and slides, so I guess what we're going to do is just give some key highlights and updates since that paper was prepared. So I'm going to begin with one of the first recommendations, which was about the quality of information sharing by partner agencies at strategy discussions. So one of the actions that we were able to do last year was to complete some draft multi-agency guidance on strategy discussions. So the City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership led on that. That's been completed and disseminated with some, more recently, some animated videos for multi-agency partners to look at, to support them to prepare for strategy discussions and what information to bring. In terms of the pathways with police, so we do have police departments that are able to contribute to strategy discussions for all different types of harm. So rather than just the traditional routes that we might have had when we were focusing on intrafamilial harm only, so that's all in place. I think so. We've been undertaking single agency and multi-agency audits over time to look at the quality of strategy discussions and information sharing. We've just completed our most recent one with the partnership on the 8th of July. So I'm really pleased to report that we found that 73% of strategy discussions were graded as good. There was 100% police attendance. Information sharing was good. There was 66.7 attendance from health partners. What we've done is we've gone beyond the statutory agency requirement for attendance, and we're now including other key partners such as schools and where parents have mental health problems, including mental health agencies as well. So I think the audits are showing a positive trajectory in terms of information sharing. In terms of the next recommendation, so what Ofsted found was that there was an inconsistent assessment and intervention in relation to children experiencing neglect, and that there was delay in our interventions. So I'm not going to go through everything that's already in the papers, but I think the key thing to update and make members aware is that Children's Social Care were looking to commission a specific assessment tool to ensure we have a consistent approach to working with parents to assess and monitor interventions around neglect. The City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership were having similar thoughts at the same time, and we've recently agreed to commission, well, the City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership have recently agreed to commission the NSPCC Graded Care Profile 2. And that was agreed in June this year. So it'd be a whole multi-agency approach to assessing and intervening in relation to neglect, and a clear approach to measuring and monitoring parental capacity to change as well. And then I think I'm going to hand over to Hugh in relation to private fostering and the next few slides.
Thank you, Lisa, and good evening again, everyone. So just another kind of key metric or performance indicator to highlight with regards to assessment is that we've really focused on the timeliness of assessments and proportionality at our front door in our assessment teams. And since December this year, that we're over 90% consistently of assessments completed within 45 working days, so within the statutory guidelines. And increasingly, we're pushing that timeline down, so families and children get an early response about what we're worried about and what we think can meet their needs. So I want to talk about the next few indicators, the first of which was the quality of assessment and planning for children subject to private fostering arrangements. This is a really small but very vulnerable cohort and significant cohort in Hackney. It's about 12 children at the moment. So all of those are now allocated in our nil recourse and private fostering teams. So we wanted to consolidate and coordinate our practice to have it delivered by a consistent team, by a consistent professional who had that body of expertise. And we've been undertaking audits over the last couple of months, and the most recent is in February 2021. And there were already positive audits, the average score was good, and we're going to continue and revisit those audits with that small cohort over the months ahead. We've developed guidance. As I say, we've consolidated all the practice in one team to make sure that guidance is consistently implemented with a consistent consultant social worker overseeing that. So again, we've got the management oversight and a consistent professional delivering those services. The next area I'm going to talk about is the timeliness, effectiveness of our pre-proceedings work, including the quality of contingency planning when we're in pre-proceedings. So our work within pre-proceedings under the public law outline is to avoid the need, if possible, for care proceedings, or to have really develop effective assessments to inform care proceedings if they are indeed required in the end. Again, this is a small cohort in Hackney at the moment. There's 10 children in 8 families that we're working with under a pre-proceedings framework. There's been some challenges around the timeliness of our pre-proceedings work, just in terms of getting assessments completed because of availability of assessors within and the restrictions of COVID, being able to meet solicitors and that sort of thing. We've developed our permanency planning reporting within our court and legal tracker. We've embedded it into our ClickSense data dashboard as well to make sure we've got effective oversight of the pre-proceedings process, and we can monitor and track effectiveness as well as the impact of those pre-proceedings process. So what difference are we making by escalating our concerns and being more authoritative with families? One of the things we've done to kind of make sure we've got rigorous management oversight of pre-proceedings is all the requests for legal advice now go through our children's resource panel, where our legal team are represented there, and that's comprised of senior managers from across the Children and Family Service. So whenever we're thinking about a pre-proceedings process and escalating our concerns when we think that a child protection plan isn't making the difference we want it to make, we'll take it to that panel and we'll have a rigorous scrutiny of the next steps and the best way forward. The other thing we've done is we've implemented permanency planning meetings within our pre-proceedings process, so we can check the progress and effectiveness of those pre-proceedings at the midway stage. So are we making a difference? Are we making the changes that we wanted to achieve with families by recognising families know, letting families know our concerns and the differences and changes that they need to make? And in terms of measuring the impact of the metrics, we're embedding a tracker about how we can measure the timeliness. So are we delivering the pre-proceedings process within the expected timescales between 12 to 16 weeks, which is in the good practice guidance from the Family Justice Board. The final area that required improvement I'm going to talk about before handing back to Lisa is our work around the welfare of children who are missing education or are home educated. And a lot of that work is led on by our colleagues in Hackney Education, but obviously we try and take as joined up approach as possible to make sure children are safeguarded. And we're really mindful of the link between children missing education and later going missing from home, impacting on their vulnerability, impacting on outcomes that they can achieve. So we've developed a structure for a biannual teaching and learning forum to support parents in securing positive outcomes for children and young people where they are, where their home education is happening. We've developed a protocol to set our approach to foster and improve relationships with the Orthodox Jewish community, about thinking about children that are missing education or not necessarily in registered education settings. We've launched an elective home education policy with schools last July.
Sorry, Hugh, can I just ask if you can just slow down a bit?
Apologies.
Some of us are struggling to keep up with you. I appreciate your attempt to get through quite a lot of detail as swiftly as possible. But
point, then it's no point in saying anything.
Okay.
If you could just slow down, speak clearly, that would be really appreciated. Yeah.
Apologies, my voice is a bit hoarse, and I have got a tendency to speak very quickly, so apologies. And I'm mindful of time. So yeah, we've launched an updated elective home education policy with schools in July. There was a public campaign supporting that in November, and that included settings within our Orthodox Jewish community and other communities across Hackney. We've redesigned the elective home education assessment framework in accordance with statutory guidance, so we're making sure that we're meeting the needs of our community and the children within it effectively. And a cross-service multi-agency protocol to unregistered settings has been live since the start of September 2020. And as I say, our colleagues in Hackney Education are leading on implementing that protocol. So just in terms of some metrics, 136 elective home education assessments were carried out last year between April 2020 and March 2021. The new assessment framework started in July. 87% of those assessments were assessed to be suitable, 9% were assessed as requiring improvement, and 4% were deemed unsuitable, and action was taken as a result of that. Following an elective home education assessment satisfaction survey, we've since refreshed our offer in July 2020. 58% of parents responded when contacted about the survey. 87% of the returns found the service to be good or excellent, found it really helpful, while 12% rated it satisfactory. No parent rated the support, advice or guidance provided as poor. So there's been a significant reduction in the number of families awaiting suitability assessments, and currently 89% of the assessments are completed within the expected 12-week period. This has been impacted on by significant growth in new families that are choosing to elect from home, given the impact of the pandemic. But the work is ongoing and it's really embedding in practice with our colleagues. So I'm going to hand back to Lisa now to talk about management oversight.
Thanks very much.
Apologies for speaking too fast.
I'll try to make sure I don't speak fast as well. And
can I just ask that we are a bit stretched for time, because we are hoping also to have a short summary on the Hackney model of social work review. So if you could be swift, please, that would be really most appreciated.
So the effectiveness of management oversight by leaders and managers was one of the most significant, I think, recommendations for us that came from Ofsted. And actually some of our recommendations here relate directly to what we've done to change the unit model. So what I'll do is I'll just give a couple of highlights, and maybe I'll hand over to members to ask questions rather than going through all of the slides. I think what I'd like to highlight from here is that we've really taken time to review and refresh and strengthen the support and development offer to our first line managers, who are consultant social workers and practice development managers, particularly through the induction programme. There's regular monthly managers meetings, action learning sets, and a strengthened communication framework. We've realigned some of those roles, so looking at what the job description says and making sure that we're really focusing on exactly what children need at each tier and each level of the management framework. I think one of the most significant changes that we've brought in is to adjust the unit model. So we still have a unit model, but rather than every single child being discussed on a rota within the group of the units, we have now changed to have individual accountable supervision held with individual workers for each child. The unit then becomes a space for all practitioners to come together to reflect on practice, progress, and importantly, to have group discussions on the most complex and high risk needs that children face and how collectively we can respond to those. So the introduction of the individual supervision framework is one of the most significant things. And in terms of our audit programme, we've recently undertaken an audit of supervision, and the majority of those audits, or the overall average, came out as being Ofsted rated good. So we're really pleased that that change is evidencing the impact of our management oversight for children. And the other thing I just wanted to highlight is we've introduced quarterly children and families, children's summaries on their files, something that we didn't have before, but it's particularly important in the context of having this interim social care database, where the navigation for information is much more challenging than on our previous formats. The last thing I'll say before questions then is on the introduction of an additional layer to our quality assurance programme. So we continue to have our audit programme complaints feedback. What we've introduced is a driving quality improvement and performance framework. It's a monthly meeting where, rather than just getting information from the top down and chasing practice and evidence of practice, we're getting reports from frontline managers up, evidencing the current level of workforce capacity, how that relates to practice, the quality of practice, the evidence around quality of practice using our database. So are reports on time? Are we seeing children on time, etc.? What are the quality of our write-ups around visits and writing to children, etc.? So that's a whole framework where, from first line managers all the way up through the system, we have a monthly reporting system that all comes together one day of the month, where we have an oversight of the entire service and practice across, and then come to some conclusions at the end of the day around what our key successes are, what our key areas of development, and what we need to prioritise working on for the next month. So I'm really conscious of time. I think it's probably helpful if I stop going through slides there and then we hand over to questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to kick us off, I think, with a question about how the metrics basically are detailing some progress being made in some areas. However, there are a number of areas where the metrics show that further improvement is still required. For example, with information sharing, children living in neglectful environments. How confident are we that sufficient and timely progress is being made in readiness for future inspection? That's the main question that I have. Do we have, I think Councillor Sizer, I can't see because I think you have a question that you wanted to ask.
It's about how well looked after the staff are and going through this process. So, well supported, positive and engaged staff, essential service improvement. Yes, it's clear that frontline staff have faced acute pressures over the past 18 months. They've had to deliver practice improvements required for Ofsted, alongside the impact of COVID and the cyber attack. So we really need to have assurance that we provide have any audits or surveys on this taking place? Has there been any increase in staff turnover in the past 12 months? And what additional resources and support mechanisms have been put in place to help staff?
If we can take those two questions first, please, and then we'll go to members for a couple more before moving on.
So I wonder if maybe I should begin, but then I'm sure colleagues Annie and Diane will be able to join in. So I think I'll start with the second question around the well-being of staff. It's absolutely at the forefront of our minds. We've gone through unprecedented experiences on the back of an Ofsted inspection that found us to be requires improvement. That we've then very quickly after that, everyone's experienced a pandemic. And then on top of that, unbelievably experienced a cyber attack, which has impacted upon all of the information available to us. So it's been an incredibly stressful time for all concerned. I mean, at the time of Ofsted, morale was found to be good. I'd say that, in the context of everything we've experienced, I think there's a challenge really to staff well-being. We've been acutely aware of that, and we have a number of interventions and plans in place around staff morale. I guess one of the things that through the the change from all of the supervision taking place in a group to supervision taking place on a one-to-one basis, I guess that's probably being experienced by staff differentially at the moment. We're in a point of transition. Some staff really yearn for the previous model. Some staff are absolutely loving the new model. So I think we're still in a process of transition, and I think that the coming months are going to be a point of bedding in those changes, making sure that we continue to listen to staff voices. I know that Diane has been, listening to staff since she's started in post and thinking about what staff are saying and what tweaks do we need to make. Is there anything that we can streamline while absolutely remaining focused on outcomes for children and our accountability to those outcomes? One of the things that we've piloted has been the introduction of something called Schwartz rounds for children. It's a model of providing emotional peer support that's been widely used in the NHS. So we've piloted that approach. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. So that's a model that we're planning to roll out. And that's something specific to children and family services where we can have themed supportive discussions, and staff themselves will choose the theme and then present on that, and then have peers, I guess, potentially offer coaching feedback, but also just be there as an ear to listen, really, around thinking about the impact of being a practitioner on ourselves and what we bring to the work ourselves as well. So that's the first thing. In relation to staff turnover, I don't have the data in front of me, but we can certainly provide that. We do continue to have a higher agency rate than we'd like to, but our staff turnover rate tends to be below below other neighbours, which is good. So we're generally good at retaining staff, but that's something we absolutely need to keep an eye on. And I think one of our next priorities is going to be looking at how do we enhance how we support and retain staff up through, whether staff want to progress up through the organisation or whether they want to remain or move sideways in posts as well. But I wondered if, I don't know, Annie, Hugh or Diane, if there's anything you also want to add to that question.
Yeah, I can come a little bit, Lisa, if that's helpful. So in terms of staff turnover, what we've noticed is people evaluating their kind of life, their kind of job in terms of the pandemics. For quite a few of our staff returned to Australia or New Zealand, for example, so that's contributed to staff turnover. We've had some of our more experienced staff leaving for promotional opportunities over the last few months. So again, that's something great for their career development and something we need to think about. How do we retain those staff if we have those opportunities available in Hackney for them? What we've been able to do is in February and March this year is we recruited a significant cohort of social workers from our agency cohort, so agency staff that became permanent social workers. So again, that's really positive, and we're looking at how we can retain those staff going forwards. And in the last couple of weeks, we've recruited a cohort of 12 newly qualified social workers in their assessed and supported year in employment. So they'll be joining us over the summer. And again, they're people that we expect to grow and develop in Hackney and contribute to our developing workforce.
Thanks, Hugh. I was just going to, sorry, Annie. I was just going to say, just following on from what Lisa and Hugh were saying in terms of, someone who's relatively new in the borough, this is 3 weeks in for me, and I am absolutely conscious and aware of staff morale at the moment. And, I have met with staff over the last couple of weeks. I am, listening, meeting with them, and that's something that I've committed to continuing to do. I know there are previous forums where staff have been listened to, but it's about embedding the kind of stuff that they've been saying, and what we do with that now and how we take that forward, so they're conscious that we are listening to them and not just playing lip service, that we are actually going to be doing something with what they're saying. So that's something that I've committed to doing as a new director coming in, and it's just absolutely looking at what that looks like long term for our committed social workers who are remaining here. And as Lisa alluded to, it's absolutely been really, really hard through challenging times, but we've been able to deliver a service, we've been able to keep children safe, and that's something that through all this, through everything that they've been through, that's something that I can feel. You can feel the passion and the tenaciousness of staff to continue to do their best with children and families.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'll just add in at the end. Thank you, Diana. I think what's really important for the Commission to know is that caseloads in Hackney are good. We have the conditions in which good practice can flourish and in which staff can be supported. We have caseloads in various social work units from 12 children to no more than 17. A little bit more if you are in the assessment service, because you would expect that in terms of throughput. But actually, in other boroughs around us, it is a struggle to caseloads that low down. And at this point of vision, it's been a conscious decision to be able to manage the number of children and families that individual social workers work to. So if I give you an example of a long-term looked after social worker that would carry a caseload, if it was a newly qualified social worker of no more than 12 children, and if it was an experienced social worker around about 17. But for some of that caseload for a social worker, when children are in long-term settled care, where they're happy, healthy, thriving, and their care arrangements are really good, then actually the relationship is with the carer. And we have a statutory responsibility to see children in no less than 3 monthly, and often our social workers are seeing them anything between 6 weeks and 8 weeks, because actually anything more than that isn't needed. And therefore, the rest of their attention is paid for those children that maybe are in less settled care arrangements. So numbers really do matter. And that's from the front door right through to the back end. We were really, really clear about when we went live with the interim database in February, that we would shift from all of the children allocated to a consultant social worker, which was the previous Hackney model. We'd still keep the methodology of the model, but we would look to professional accountability by individual casework. Moving to that model has allowed us to manage offer much more management support individually to social workers alongside wrapping the clinical service around them. I think for some staff, for some people, they find that difficult. But actually, if you look at any other social care environment and that creates the conditions in which great practice can flourish to achieve really high outcomes for children, the conditions are here in Hackney for that, really. We've just got to hold our staff through that, which is why it's really helpful, and Diane's visibility over the last 3 weeks has just been fantastic.
And just to quickly say, speaking to both Annie and Diane, and meeting with her already in her new role, it was about understanding the way that the model worked previously, knowing that Hackney's renowned for this model, and that model has served its course well, but also it's how we reflect and move forward in that journey back to good, then moving to outstanding, how we remove the layers to make sure that model is more working better for staff, children and families. And there isn't so many layers to get through for a practitioner when they're making decision making.
Although I'm conscious that we are going to be moving on to the to talking about the model, and I am conscious of time. Could I, if I could please have an answer to that question about the metrics in terms of the improvements that we are still yet to have made, and how ready we feel we are for future inspection. And then I'll also take just 2 questions, I think, from Councillor Peters and Shabnam before moving on to the model, if that's okay.
So maybe helpful if I answer your question about how ready are we for future
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So the improvement journey for Hackney, part of the reason for me supporting Diane for the next few weeks is to make sure that we have our Annex A documentation in place. Now that's a challenge when when we're working in the current cyber environment. But some of the key points of inspection was about a lack of management oversight, a lack of the child's lived experience coming through a case file, drift and delay in decision making. And those are all things that we have absolutely put in place. I think, as Diane just said, it will take time to really embed that. Are we ready right here, right now, for inspectors to walk in? Well, any children's services has to be ready for the call on a Tuesday, really. And none of us can predict when they will come in. There's every chance that inspectors will be in either for a focused visit, we hope, really, sometime between now and Christmas. And will we be able to evidence improvement that's significant since the last time we came in? Without a shadow of a doubt, we will. Does that mean that Hackney will consistently deliver right here, right now, good children's social work services as rated by Ofsted? And no, I don't. I think we're still on that journey.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Peters and then Shabnam, please.
So I think this is going to overlap somewhat with the question you just asked, Chair, but I'll ask in any case. I think it's a little more focused, maybe. So just to remind ourselves that sort of in February 2019 we had this Children's Services focus visit, and then November 2019 Children's Services inspection. In the focus visit, there was, one line was, there's a high number of children continue to live in situations of significant harm for too long. And then in the November a report from the November inspection, we heard that some children were living in situations of significant harm for too long before action was taken. And one of the issues that was raised was about excessive deference to family settings and the reluctance to take children out of families when there was that significant harm. So, but I clearly am very reassured by everything that we've heard and the action plan and everything that you've spoken to us about. But I would appreciate, I guess, an answer to this question. Are we satisfied that there aren't children living in situations of significant harm for too long before action is taken, when action should be taken? And are we satisfied that there aren't a high number of children in Hackney who continue to live in situations of significant harm for too long?
So, Councillor Peters, if you don't mind, Chair, I'll take that question. The amount of work we've done, Councillor Peters, on being able to manage children's plans and the improvement and their lived experience, it's been a forensic journey for the last 9 months, with a real attention to detail about management sign-off of assessment and the review of case lengths, and being able to move from, I can't express strongly enough that part of the reason why I believe that that's what happened when Ofsted came in then was that we had the Hackney model was based upon originally a consultant social worker having 34 children allocated to them only, and then a collaboration of workers working to those children. At the point where Ofsted walked in, consultant social workers had upwards of 80 children allocated to them, okay? And actually, they had a group of workers working to those children and families, but the model itself didn't flush out from a performance point of view the progress at significant periods in a child's lived experience, so that you could see that. And any good children's social care is only as good as the intelligence you use through performance information, and then what you do about that. By deconstructing that and putting casework allocation and given the right conditions in which professional social workers registered by England have accountability for children, and we have a management structure. So we now have in place social workers with a consultant social worker and then a practice development manager. The practice development manager has a cluster of 3 consultant social workers with 3 units. So those are the conditions in which you prevent children slipping through the net, and statements like children's being left in significant harm for too long. So I would say that our conditions are absolutely right to prevent that. It is a very, very different landscape right here, right now, day in, day out in Hackney Children's Services than it was in 2019. For some practitioners, they find that pressurising. But if you walk to another local authority, it would be hard to find social workers that had 12 to 15 children allocated to them, really. So the conditions are right in which to catch that. Our Children's Resource Panel has been a significant piece of work around updating the scrutiny that happens through our resource panel. That's helped us to prevent children inappropriately coming into care. It's helped us, Hugh said earlier on, we put the request for legal advice into the Children's Resource Panel. So it is chaired now by Diane with all of the senior leaders at that panel. So instead of a consultant social worker seeking legal advice and then having to tell their manager that happens, actually the approval to do that is managed from the very first off. And that's how you stop drift and delay, really. The third part of our sort of panel has prevention of children, scrutiny, flood it with resource to prevent children coming into care or bring the right children in. The middle bit is the right legal advice. And then the third bit is where we've looked at the children's residential review and care arrangements. So we now have a system which is absolutely systematic from the entry into children's social care, including step down to early help through to permanence. That's the reassurance I would give you. It needs time to bed in, but without any doubt, there are conditions in which great practice now has the opportunity to flourish. If you're on silent or...
Chair, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Shabnam.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, my question is quite specific, actually, and refers to children who are home educated, specifically those with an EHCP. I've noticed says that 54% of those with an EHCP have had an annual review. That's a really low number, and I wanted to ask, why is that the case? What obstacles are there that are preventing a much more comprehensive review of children with EHCPs?
I wonder if you want to pick that one up, because you've been doing quite a lot of work on this recently.
Well, I think our colleagues from SEND will be better placed to answer that because they're responsible for implementing and delivering the ECP reviews and undertaking the assessments, although we do contribute to those from a social care point of view. My understanding is that the rates improved. Again, I don't have those figures to hand, but I can get those back to you. So I think there's been something about Fran and Joe. They were introduced, they're new into Hackney, and they're doing a lot of work in terms of improving the quality and the standards and making sure there's consistent application of those across that team.
I think this is something that we might have to follow up with at a later date, the answer to that question specifically from relevant officers. But could we now please move on to the review of the Hackney model of social work, please, bearing in mind that we have covered much of this in what we've just discussed in relation to the action plan. So handing over again to officers, please.
Chair, I wonder whether it might just be helpful if we open it to questions.
Questions, okay. Do we have questions from the Commission on that model? Anel, is your question about the model? I think you're on mute, Anel. There you go. Oh, yeah.
First, I'd like to say thank you to the officers who has delivered quite detailed reports on the services in Hackney. And I was, while some of the reports were being read to me or being listened to, my mind, I went back to the Refocusing Social Work initiative in Hackney that started some years ago, and I was privileged to sit in one of their presentations at what was the Community Care Life event. And I was saying to myself, I wonder if that initiative is still in action in Hackney, and I'm pleased to say that it is happening. And also, what I want to ask is, in terms of the makeup of your workforce, does that reflect the community that it serves? Because we do know that in all aspects of protecting and safeguarding children, the workforce needs to reflect the community that it serves. And I'm sure that you will all agree that is key to the work that you're doing today. So could you enlighten me and the rest of the Commission whether or not that is happening or is about to happen in some aspect or in some form?
Before we move on to answers to that question, sorry, Lisa, I just wondered, do we have any other questions from the Commission on the model, quite specifically? If not, I just have a question, and that is, why have we decided to do this? Although I feel like we've had some answers to that, but is it the Ofsted report that has prompted this? You know, is it that the model that we previously had only worked with the funding model that we had at the time, and that it just isn't working in these times? But what's prompted this shift, and what are the strategic ambitions or intentions for the review of the Hackney model?
Okay, so shall I start with talking about our workforce data? So I don't have the actual data in front of me, but we can absolutely share some reports afterwards. So we monitor our workforce data on a quarterly basis, and that's for the whole of children and families, including social work, but not exclusive to social work. So what we do know is that at practitioner level, our representation of staff as compared to the local community is fairly good, but there is definitely some room for improvement there. What we've noticed is that in terms of permanent staff, we have a higher proportion of white staff. In terms of agency, we have a high proportion of Black practitioners. So some of our recent work to, for example, send individual letters to agency workers, encouraging them to become permanent staff, has been successful. And that's what we want to do more of, to get that demography reflecting the local community. As you go up through senior leadership levels, we're there's a disproportionate number of white senior members of staff, which I'm sure you've seen visibly through attendance at these meetings. That's something we're committed to change through succession planning and through our anti-racist action plan, looking at inclusive recruitment, aspirational support for Black staff, and looking to ensure that our staff reflect more closely the of our children and families, and ensure that our staff have the cultural competence and cultural humility where they're working with families that aren't from the same background as them, how to approach, how to be genuinely curious and understanding that family's history, cultural heritage, creation of meaning and values in their family, and the interplay between that and how they meet their children's needs. So I'm happy to share some more data on that if that would be helpful. In relation to the second question, I think I'm happy to start, but then I'd probably hand over to Annie to add to as well. So I think in relation to the unit model, I think, the Hackney model, was very innovative back in 2008, radically changed the way that we did social work, a focus on really looking to ensure we spend increased amount of time with families, high level of admin supports, that social workers spent less time doing admin, more time in direct work. I think the impact of changing resources, increased demands, really has had a significant impact upon that. So we'd been hearing from staff for some time that this isn't working. We're struggling to cover everything that we need to do in the unit meeting in the way that we need to, or to the quality that we want to, because of the number of children that we need to consider. So I'd say the prompt for change was both feedback from staff, our own observations of the volume of the frequency of discussions of children in those meetings, and how many can you realistically cover, but then absolutely the Ofsted feedback and findings around management oversight in particular, and following the Ofsted focus visit and ILACs, we brought together our whole staff group to obtain some feedback. We've continued with staff focus groups, and the unit model was the single biggest issue that people wanted to resolve, that there was a mismatch between what the model wanted to do and were practically able to do with the numbers of children that we're now supporting. So I think it's probably a combination of all of those things, as you mentioned. But I wondered, Annie, is there anything else that you'd like to say as well?
I think there's just a couple of things to add, and I promise we won't keep you much longer, but I think the other thing to add is that, it's 13 years ago or thereabouts that the Hackney model was, birthed, if you like. And as somebody who, doesn't live in London, I've watched Hackney from afar for a long time. So it's been a real honour to have been the interim director and to support Diane coming in as your permanent director. But actually the landscape of children's services over that 13-year period has really changed. And over that 13-year period, we have contextual safeguarding in a way that none of us could ever have dreamt about 13 years ago. And the fact that we talk about domestic abuse in the way that we do, let alone all of the impacts of, our real approach to active anti-racist practice now. So I think there is a different landscape to there was when the Hackney model itself was founded. So when you say, Chair, is it about money? Is it about strength? The other thing to bear in mind is that when the Hackney model birthed, we didn't have the kind of inspection framework in the way that it now has, because of all of the right reasons. And really the inspection Ofsted are about coming in, and they should not know any more than we know. But you can't do that if actually the volume of stuff in the service actually has the ability to do the right job. The one really precious gift of the Hackney model is our clinical service. Certainly as I get ready to leave you in Hackney, I take away such rich learning, and one part of that is just how brilliant our clinical service is. The clinical service itself was originally very white dominated, very psychologist based dominated, and actually your amazing Tim Toppy, head of clinical practice, has really transformed that service, where we've been a lot more diverse in our recruitment and much more about what children and families need around systemic family therapists as opposed to a clinical psychologist. So that's a live work it would be good perhaps for the Commission to have a report about the update for the clinical service, because that's the service that makes the Hackney model even more precious. And it's firmly in place, and it's modernised, and it's more relevant to what children and families face now. Hackney is now part of the Ofsted framework, and we no longer have the dispensation around performance information that Hackney had back in 2013 and over the first 10 years of it. And actually the Ofsted framework, the ILAC, the focus visit first of all unearthed that, and then the ILAC visit unearthed that, and that's where you had statements like drift and delay. So performance and needing to stick to statutory timescales has been a transformational journey for practitioners in Hackney, particularly over the last year. So there are many, it's multifaceted, is the reason for us updating and refreshing the Hackney model, and just would really encourage you to hear that message, that it hasn't been about taking it away, it's been about updating, refreshing, making it fit for purpose now and resilient for future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to have to move on now to the next item. But before we do, first I'd like to thank officers for your really thorough updates and your continued work on the action plan. I think it's really important that the Commission maintains oversight of the progress against the action plan. And I'm wondering, however, if it might be useful for us to perhaps just to keep oversight of the metrics and to have a look at to have a report for us to note, at least at more of a sort of frequent basis, and perhaps for us to determine whether and when it is that we feel that we need to hear from officers again for an update, if we identify that there are any areas that we feel that maybe progress is perhaps lagging on. That maybe makes sense to me. I don't know about other members of the Commission as the way forward, perhaps, rather than to keep bringing you back in to give verbal updates if progress is ticking over nicely. Again, thank you very much to all officers for your contributions towards that item this evening and for your reports. Thank you. Now, moving on to item 7, which is the work programme. The updated outline work programme is attached in the agenda. Since last meeting, together with the Vice Chair, I've met with both Cabinet members to discuss the work programme going forward into 2021-2022, and we'll also be meeting senior officers in the coming weeks. We will be consulting and updating the Commission as we go forward in agreeing the work programme over the summer. The Scrutiny officer will take us through the main developments that have been agreed since the last meeting.
I just want to quickly just highlight some of the main changes that we'll have. We've agreed an item on maternal mental health disparities, which will be a joint health item with Health in Hackney. We're going to be taking that on the 11th of October, so that'll be at the Health in Hackney meeting rather than our own. The housing support for young people leaving care. We've had a briefing from officers on the subject, and the Chair and Vice Chair with the Chair of Living in Hackney will be meeting officers very soon to scope out that item as well. That will be taken on the Living in Hackney agenda, and that will probably be in October or November time later this year. So there'll be one whole Living in Hackney meeting will be dedicated to that issue. The impact of local.
If there's a Living in Hackney meeting, does that mean that we, sort of members of this commission, then go to the Living in Hackney meeting and report back, or how does it interact?
So it's a joint meeting. So it's a collaborative effort between us. We'll set up the kind of scope and which officers and who will kind of come to present the meeting. So it'll just be a joint meeting of. It's actually we'll be on the Living in Hackney work programme, but it'll be a joint meeting as such. So.
Thank you.
Thirdly, is just the impact of low traffic neighbourhoods on children and young people. The Chair and Vice Chair will be meeting with our transport officers, with the Chair of Skills, Economy and Growth to scope that item. and to hopefully that be coming sort of in November time. Again, that'll be on the skills economy and growth work programme. And finally, just that we'll be meeting, obviously, the new director of children's social care. We'll be looking at our review for the forthcoming year around adolescents entering care. We're looking to kind of scope that as well as where we can have some positive and beneficial impact. So those are the main items. As I say, we will be kind of updating you over the summer, members of the Commission, and we'll be finalising the work programme ready for the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Martin. And just to mention that you'll notice that we're trying as hard as we can, I think, to work collaboratively with the other commissions, because ultimately children and young people are impacted by absolutely everything that happens in the borough. So it almost doesn't even make sense that we as a commission just focus on children's services, education, when transport and maternal mental health and health in general, all of these things impact our children and young people. And increasingly we're looking for opportunities to work with our colleagues on other commissions to see if we can explore any link between the work that they are doing and any emerging trends. So for example, the maternal mental health was prompted by an interest that we have in exploring the extent to which this impacts the children who are entering our care system as a result of emotional neglect and various different issues, because we know that there are links between this and maternal mental health, which we don't exclusively cover on this commission. So just to give a bit of background into why we're doing that sort of cross-working. Okay, moving now on to item 8, which is the minutes. Do members have any issues arising from the minutes? So matters arising at 5.5 and 5.6, the Commission discussed borough-wide attainment data for children and young people sitting exams for 2020 and in the forthcoming year. The absence of this data is concerning, as this is central to assessments on the attainment gap, an ongoing piece of work of the Commission. So the Commission will meet with officers to see how best to take this forward, because I think on reflection we felt that this answer was we just didn't really feel that we had sufficient oversight from the information that was shared with us at that meeting. And then the last item is any other business. And we don't have any other business, so the date for the next meeting is the 6th of October 2021. And what the rest of you can't hear is that us here in the town hall have had to listen to the heavens open up while you've been in this meeting. We're really envious of you at home and are now wondering how we're going to get home without being completely soaked. So enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody, and thank you very much for your attendance, remotely or otherwise.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks, Claire. Enjoy the summer rain.
Are you summer?
Sounds really horrible.